Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Mondays Down South. We do not have Zach here, but we do have Michael Dolan, one of our longtime guests and one of our favorite people to have on as a co-anchor on here when he comes on, but also one of the better writers that we know out there. So welcome back, Dolan. Always excited to have you, my friend. We're going to start talking a little NFL. We're going to talk basketball. I wanted to bring it up this week because I think Dolan's probably way more interested in the NBA than he has been in seasons after this deadline. So he's probably in good spirits about that, and just excited to get the ball rolling. This is actually my first podcast from the new condo, so my apologies for being on my phone for the viewers and listeners, but I promise. Well, ironically enough, it gives me better video quality. It was the joke that Evan and I had, but I promise as I get a little more set up here, the setup here will be better than ever. So excited to get the ball rolling. Dolan, Evan, any first words for the viewers?
Nothing here. Just excited to chat with you guys for however long we're on this pod today. Been a little while. I was just thinking right before hopping on, I was like, man, it's going to feel weird hopping on one of these podcasts and not going through a line of picks at the end of it. So excited to shake things up a little bit, talk about a couple different topics, and then just catch up in general. So looking forward to it.
For sure. Always got to get creative with these off-season topics, but soon enough we'll be back in draft season and off-season stuff. So, but we gotta close out the year, right? We haven't talked since the Super Bowl, so I gotta put a bow on it a little bit.
100%. And the Super Bowl is probably a good first starting point, as Evan mentioned it. What a finish of the season. We haven't really talked about it much since the pre-Super Bowl predictions, but Bengals, Rams, amazing game. I would argue just as amazing of a halftime show as the Eminem fan that I am. Had to throw that out there. But just overarchingly, it was such a fun spectacle. Dolan, I don't know what you did for the Super Bowl, but Evan and I were actually in New York together with Zach and Monhas, and we were sports betting as the progress was going on, and it paid dividends. So we were very happy campers. And the bar was enjoying our presence, I think. So overarchingly, just a really fun game. Do you guys have any strong takeaways or just anything fun to talk about from that specific day? I think Evan and I are probably gonna have similar stories, but Dolan, I don't know what you're up to. So
yeah, I was actually in Breckenridge, which, if you don't know, is a ski town out here. So did a little skiing by day and then watching the Super Bowl by night. So definitely a pretty fantastic weekend overall. As far as the actual game, I mean, I agree. It was an awesome game, and the halftime I think was just as good. I felt like we went back to like fifth grade or whatever it was when like all those songs first started coming out, and I was like, man, this is all the music that got me into hip hop. So it was like super cool to kind of reminisce and enjoy that a little bit. As for the actual game, I just thought it was almost like poetic. It was like going in, it was like, yeah, it's going to kill the Bengals is their offensive line going against the Rams defensive line. And then you see at the end of the game, it's like, boom, this is what ultimately sealed it. What did Burrow go down like 7 times or something absurd like that? Which like, I think it was 9 against the Titans. I don't know how many it was against the Chiefs. I don't think it was as bad, but it's like, you can only sustain that for so long. And it doesn't matter how good your quarterback, receiver, and the rest of the weapons are. If you can't stop Aaron Donald, you're not going to win the biggest game on TV.
Yeah, I think the game kind of came down to the stars, right? Like the stars came out to play in the second half. I mean, the Bengals punched the Rams in the mouth going into half, and especially coming out of the half. And then Cooper Kupp down the stretch was pretty quiet the whole game, especially after Odell went down. They started like really doubling him. And then obviously Aaron Donald too, like basically took over the game in the second half and had a really good shot at that MVP award, but Kupp ended up getting him. And yeah, I mean, just a great game all around. Glad there was a little dicey there with a couple Burrow and Stafford potential injuries. So I'm glad we didn't end up watching backup quarterbacks there at the end, and both guys were able to tough it out. But yeah, stars came out to play, which would have included Odell if he sadly didn't go down because he was balling out early. But yeah, it kind of went to form for me. I think my prediction was 24-20 and ended 23-20 if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, good one. Sai?
Yeah, you were on point with the prediction. I got to give you that. Also, Kupp got 2 touchdowns, so obviously can't fault him for giving the MVP. And he was very clutch at the end. However, it's funny, but I still think I would give it to Aaron Donald because he just it was kind of similar to what Von Miller did when the Broncos won a few years back when Peyton was quarterback, and he was playing with like half a neck, and the defense had such a big impact, and like the big time plays, and that's kind of what it felt like, and especially in the second half, like Dolan said, they were kind of biding their time. They were getting pressure in the first half, and in the second half, they just took the wheels off and said, we're just gonna go after Burrow, and clearly that was the winning strategy. And Donald was a part of every single one of those plays, one way or another. And I personally think I would have given it to him, but obviously I can't dispute giving to Kupp, who had one of the greatest receiving seasons of all time. So props to him on that. Just a huge win for the Rams. I'm so happy for Matt Stafford and Aaron Donald, two guys that I really wanted to win Super Bowl rings in their careers, especially Donald. I just think Donald is such a beautiful situation to kind of happen for the game, for him to kind of just completely change what the defensive tackle position could look like. And nobody has quite been able to do it like him. And I think this cements him as the greatest interior lineman in the history of the NFL for me personally. You know, I might be biased because he's a more new school guy, but that's just how I feel. So overarching, I think great game. The Bengals will be back, though. They'll be back. I have no doubts about that. For them to be as young as they were, and you know, it's funny. Dolan's on here. I think Dolan and I and Zach and Evan, I think we had that segment where we talked about what do we actually think about the Bengals, and we had a pretty extensive conversation. And I think me, Dolan, I think Ev was the highest on him. I think Dolan and I both said they were a few years away, and I think Zach basically just like we're like, oh, they're
Zach
so
was not
overrated.
a fan.
Yeah, Zach.
He
Zach
still is not.
Wasn't a fan.
He
even,
still
even
is not.
Even after the Super Bowl, he wasn't a fan. So it's pretty funny to think we got Dolan back. So that's good timing on our part after that segment. But yeah, all things considered, just super happy for both teams because I think the Bengals have an incredibly bright future in front of them, better than I ever thought, at least up front. And then the Rams, I mean, regardless of what happens going forward with Donald's potential retirement, which I don't think is going to happen, but potential retirement, and with whatever happens with the Rams going forward, it seems like they're going to have a pretty solid team for the next coming years. So it was just a fun event, guys. Like that was the most fun I had watching a Super Bowl in a long time, especially because, as you guys know, I got tired of all those Brady ones and the boring like 12-9 games or whatever else. And then again, I just got to take a second. That halftime show was, I mean, in my opinion, the greatest of all time by a country mile. Like it was so good. Like every single one of them put on a show, and they just did such a good job of putting it all together. I thought overall, LA did such a good job hosting that Super Bowl. So props to them. And yeah, just amazing series and season.
The LA spectacle, what was it? You know, that they were true to form and really put on a show. But good thing McVay's not going up to the broadcast booth, right? I mean, he was floating them retirement rumors similar to Donald after the game over. And what did he turned down 20 million a year from Amazon? Was that the number?
It was right around 20 million. Yep.
It was over $1 million a game. I was like, oh my gosh.
I have a feeling he's still getting a pretty juicy pay raise this offseason, though.
Yeah, that's what I was
Aaron Donald.
He's going to be making. I'm guessing he's going to be making close to that if he's staying, right? Like I think for him to stay with the Rams, it would take them doing that. So I'm sure they talked about it.
But yeah, I do agree with you, Si, on Donald. I think he would have probably been my my MVP vote because I think what kind of gets lost in things is how well the Rams defense played as a unit. They let up 20 points, which is like you would say considered average, maybe slightly above average in today's NFL. But you got to think the long T. Higgins touchdown, no one can argue that shouldn't have been a touchdown. So you wipe away 7 points there. And then their other touchdown came as a result of a halfback pass, which, you know, you can't really bank on that being your sustainable offense overall. So let's say that turns into a field goal. You're looking at the defense probably as a whole really held the Bengals, who have been like kind of a high powered offense for these past couple of weeks, to like essentially a 10-point game. Like obviously easy to kind of look back and take away plays and such. But overall, I think obviously Donald was dominant. Von Miller was right there, I think, which is getting lost in the shuffle a lot. Jalen Ramsey got beat on that one play, but you erased with a 75-yarder and then another bomb he led up to Chase. But outside of that, he kind of locked it down. There's obviously when you're a corner, you know, 2 big plays make it look like you had a horrible game overall. But I think shout out to him, and he's still, in my opinion, the best corner in the league. And it just goes to show what having 3 absolute studs on your defense can do for you.
Yeah, I think Ramsey's getting the short end of this stick because I fully, wholeheartedly believe that was offensive PI on the touchdown to Higgins. And I thought that was like so absurd to me that didn't get called. And then the other funny part is that was the least penalized game I had seen till maybe the very finish of the game. I mean, up until that
Mhm.
Ramsey penalty, if I remember correctly, I don't even remember there being a single holding call the entire game. Like you got to imagine there was something that was said to the refs before where it was like, you're not deciding this game. So that play was a little interesting. But then the last series, the very blatant makeup call, like I'm not saying that there wasn't a potential defensive holding on Cooper Kupp, but I mean, they let that fly all game. And then the next play, they 100%, that was a makeup call. And I had no problem with it too, because I was like, you know what? They got screwed
First one
early
was
on one
bad.
and they got
Yeah.
screwed again. So it was about time that they got one, and it made for one heck of a finish. And to be honest, it wasn't a huge talking point after the fact, because I think everybody was on the same page about overarchingly. Shout out to the refs. It was pretty, with the exception of like that one bad call. I think overarchingly it was like a pretty well refed game where they didn't like impact the result by as much as maybe in the past. So I gotta tip my hat to that one. And
Shoot, the
overarchingly,
Bengals
like,
should have tried holding.
I know, right? Honestly,
Nothing's getting called. They're letting up 7 sacks. You know, just
honestly.
do what
And
you can.
that's, you know what their focus is going forward. But hey, the funny part is, remember at the very beginning of the year when we had the conversation, Jamar Chase or Panay Sewell or Slater? I mean, come on, like forget about it. I don't care if Burrow got sacked 500 times. Jamar Chase was the right pick for him, and that dude's gonna go down as one of the best to do it if he keeps this trajectory up. So good for them, and good for Burrow getting his guy. So I don't know. I'm excited to watch him going forward.
They do
Yeah,
still
goes
need
to-
like 3 linemen though. They need to fix that. As much as the Chase one worked out, like Burrow might not last long, like at this rate.
True.
To
He almost
be
got
honest.
himself hurt again.
Yeah.
I'm always of the mindset that you kind of want to use free agency to plug your holes, which I think is why it's kind of nice the way the NFL does it, where free agency's first, then you have the draft. So you can plug all your holes, go in theory, you know, by spending money in free agency, making trades, whatever you got to do. And then you can go into the draft and truly just take the best player available. And obviously, I think there weren't necessarily a ton of people that were saying Sewell was a clearly better prospect than Chase. I think they were both graded extremely highly. And it was just kind of like, well, when in doubt, go for need. And it just goes to show you what taking the best player available is. I mean, the Lions were the second worst team in the league this year. They're drafting number 2 again this year. And the Bengals were the second best if you're using that as your ranking system. So I think it just goes to show, as much as we like to get caught up, especially this time of year, about like, okay, this team needs this team needs this. Every once in a while, it's just like, no, let's just get the best football player on our team and see what happens.
Yeah, and like I also think that if the person available like was Waddle and Jamar Chase wasn't available, I think they would have gone. So I think one of the main reasons they went with Chase was obviously they saw the potential for his success in the same way you could have seen with any receiver, but the familiarity between Burrow and Chase has got to be a big part, because you know they talked to Burrow and you know there was agreement that that's the guy that they were all on the same page with, and clearly it paid off because it was a group decision. So that's one thing I don't go around for. I was also more a Slater guy than I was a Sewell guy. Like obviously I think Sewell's got the higher ceiling, but Slater came in already having had massive impact against guys that ended up being studs in the NFL, Chase Young being an example. So I don't know. Ultimately, I don't think the Bengals are upset with themselves, but I don't think the Lions are upset with themselves. Even if they have the 2 pick, I don't think they're upset they pick Sewell, because I am a firm believer. I actually believe a little differently, Dolan, that at least as far as the trenches goes in the first round of the draft, that's what I want to address. I want to go offensive line, defensive line, because I think that's a little bit more straightforward to predict, and then go for skill positions later in the draft. And then in free agency, maybe address a little bit more of like a one guy here or there, because I personally, I mean, maybe this is my bias, but that's kind of been the recipe for rebuilding the Colts or rebuilding maybe the Redskins or
The Eagles, that's their MO for sure.
The Eagles. I think
Commander's side.
Sorry, the command. Oh, my fault, man. It's all switching up. It's been so long since we've done one of these. I forget that you guys keep changing your name every season. No, that's funny. But all in all, I think great season, and I also think it tees us up very well for some off-season conversation, because there's a lot to talk about quarterback carousel wise, as well as other potential trades that might come up. So let's get that over to you guys.
That's what I was going to say. I think the big thing the Bengals, success shows is like, man, the NFL world gets a lot easier when you find your quarterback. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden they went from nothing to, and we knew they had Burrow. Obviously the health was a question mark coming off the injury, but shows something. And like I said, that cues up an off season where I'm not sure a lot of these big name quarterbacks are as available as they seem, but oh man, there's a lot in the rumor mill at the quarterback position. So I don't know where we want to take it from here. I guess storylines wise, maybe we kind of dive into the quarterback situation a little bit on some predictions you guys have on who's going to go where, what teams are going to do. I don't know. Any thoughts around that?
Well, I'll start with this. Dolan came on a podcast, I think midway through the season, so we could talk about the state of the Eagles trade, trading us Wentz and everything going from there. I just want to go on record and say this: if we're talking purely play wise, I don't think we should abandon the chip on Wentz, because I personally think that he's getting a little bit too much flack for how things played out. I think ultimately, like, had the season, this isn't an excuse, this is just what I ultimately believe. Had he not come over and had to have foot surgery along with Quentin Nelson at the very beginning of the season, I think there's no doubt we would have been a playoff team, because we started off on so slow without having an off season to practice. And then with our number one quarterback and with our best player on offense next to him and Nelson, came off to a slow start the first couple of games. And then for, I would say, 80% of the rest of the season, I think we were one of the better teams in the NFL on the way that we performed. We beat some of our best competition, everything like that. And then there's no excuses for how we finished the season. We played terribly and lost to the Jaguars after losing to the Raiders. Admittedly, the Raiders beat some good teams going down the stretch, but the Jaguars games, there's no explanation for. And obviously a big part of that is on Wentz. But if you look at what he did throughout the course of the season, as somebody who watched him every week, I think sometimes because of his past with the Eagles and because of his locker room stuff, sometimes his on-field play gets scrutinized maybe a little bit more than I think it deserves to be in certain games, because he also was a catalyst for us winning some of those bigger games. And I do believe that we can be a playoff team with Wentz. Now, the question is, can we win a Super Bowl with them? And it seems like our team is starting to question that. And I think I got to give Evan credit where credit is due, because I think Evan was saying that he believes it's more than just his play, because if it was just his play, then I feel like we'd probably be willing to give him another season. But I think the concern, or at least what I'm hearing, is maybe there's other stuff going on in like the locker room where people just can't vibe with them. And that's frustrating, because I do think that given the rumor mills or whatever it is, like, the only way we're upgrading is if we get Wilson or Rodgers. Otherwise, I don't see any possible situation in which we end up in a quarterback situation better than what we have with Wentz as our quarterback. So he must have really rubbed us the wrong way. And I wonder if Dolan has a perspective on that, given the fact that he was an Eagles fan and given the fact that you did get a first-round pick out of it, because he did play enough games, and, we're one game away from playoffs too. So just kind of want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely happy with the trade, with how the way the trade shook out. And I know when we talked about this on the pod last time, I think we both were. I don't know if you've wavered a little bit there or not, but in regards to what you were saying about, like, maybe something going on personality wise, like, there wasn't anything explicit that necessarily came out when kind of this same situation was happening last year in Philly, but just kind of reading between the tea leaves, there was definitely a sense that, like, the locker room just really, really liked Jalen Hurts, and they were like, we want to roll with this guy. And, like, a large part of that is surely an indictment on Hurts himself, but you really don't want, your starting quarterback to be the guy who, like, people want someone else. And so I think part of it was, obviously, he played horribly last year, but the Eagles were kind of a dumpster fire overall last year, so you can't pin it all on him. But I really do think he just didn't handle pressure as well as some people do. I mean, Philly's a tough media market to play in. You got to have some thick skin. And I think Indy, like, one of the narratives was it'll be a little easier on him because it's not, like, as intense from a media pressure perspective. But at the same time, you realize, like, he kind of came in there and was like, there was a ton of pressure because he was kind of spoon-fed in this situation. It was a playoff roster with the coach that he's had success with. And there's just, like, the injuries he was battling through. And there was a lot kind of going off. But yeah, this was a long-winded way of saying it. It does kind of sound like he's not the leader that you necessarily want. And this is all speculation here, that you really want out of your quarterback position. And it's like, okay, is that okay if you have a Super Bowl caliber roster and you can say, hey, Jonathan Taylor or Quentin Nelson's going to be, like, the true captain of our offense? Can you get by with that when you have another, like, really good defense? Maybe, definitely maybe. I mean, the thing about Wentz is he can definitely make any throw imaginable. Like, he has a crazy arm. He's athletic. Like, he has all the physical tools. It's just something's kind of off. And I think seeing it for a season, stepping back, kind of taking away my Eagles colored glasses and realizing, like, okay, these mistakes are just kind of baked into who he is. And like, when he had that fantastic MVP year with the Eagles, that was a similarly stacked roster to kind of what you're dealing with the Colts. I think there was maybe a couple more weapons on the Eagles that year, but it was another fantastic offensive line that he was working around. Reich and Peterson were the ones calling the shots there. So I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of with you on the what is a better option. And if you are going for a better option, how much is it going to cost? And is it going to be a marginal upgrade? If for whatever the reason, you know, one of these quarterbacks we're talking about, Rodgers, Wilson, or whatever, says we want out, we want to blow it up. Yeah, absolutely. You go get that guy, because you absolutely have a championship caliber roster. I think probably outside of the quarterback position, but you're not going to trade for Derek Carr, I don't think. Is that bringing your ceiling up anymore? Or are you going to say, hey, we're going to sign Mitch Trubisky and hope to get a reclamation project, or Marcus Mariota on his third or fourth team or whatever it is? So I think you kind of have to stand pat and see what you got, knowing that that's frustrating. But I don't know, things have started to change quicker and quicker in the NFL, so wouldn't be surprised no matter what happens.
The only thing I'll add is the other thing that made it kind of hard on Wentz is, like, the Colts really only need a game manager when you have Jonathan Taylor. Like, they probably need another weapon to help out Pittman, who's a stud, now that Hilton's on the older side. But like, Wentz is just like the complete opposite of that. Like, his biggest problem on the field is, you know, trying to play hero ball, too many turnovers, catastrophic turnovers, which is like, you know, obviously you can teach a guy to not do that, but like, that is such a huge gap from a teachability perspective, if that's even a word, to bring him to being that game manager. So I just think stylistically, he's not the kind of guy you want. And I agree. I think Jimmy G would be an upgrade, a very slight upgrade. And it looks like Rodgers, we expect to say Wilson is not going to Indianapolis. He's too much of like a celebrity these days and wants to stay on the West Coast if he even leaves. So your Carr's not going anywhere. Deshaun's tied up. So you're like, you really don't have any upgrade opportunities, assuming like the longer shots of Kyler, Kirk Cousins, and even Lamar's name now is in trade rumors, aren't actually, you know, any merit to. So, but you can save what, 20 million on the cap for Wentz?
15
million, save 15 million. Mariota's going to cost less than that. I don't know. Mariota's not a bad option for you guys, but it'll be interesting to see. I just don't know what direction you're going to go, which it will change, I think, the narrative of, you know, how we look at this decision, because it's hard to upgrade, but saving that kind of money does make a big difference. So it's hard to say.
I will say this though, out of all the guys that you mentioned just now, the only people that I would be okay with us moving on from Wentz from would be Rodgers or Wilson. And I am like, we have the roster right now to literally trade, you know, our draft capital for the next couple of seasons, you know, give up Wentz. And if we were able to get one of those two guys and just go all in the way the Rams did for Stafford, we still have a ton of cap space to go sign a receiver and really just fill like one or two more roster holes. And we would be right there with anybody in terms of a complete roster, because we have one of the best offensive lines. We have an amazing foundation with guys like Leonard on defense. We have Jonathan Taylor, who, you know, right now you could argue is the best running back in the NFL, at least in the sense of what he did last season. And you put that together, you give them a great quarterback. Like, you know, we don't even need a great quarterback. You need like you said, Ev, if you had a good game manager, we could really take this thing all the way. But flip side to that is, I think you only do it if you get one of those two guys. And in my mind, I'm thinking that's the only way that Ballard would do it too, because he knows he loves his picks and he knows he gave up a first round pick for Wentz. And the other thing that I'm going to point out is, I agree the turnovers that he has are catastrophic in nature, where they're like highlight reel turnovers. Like it's actually unfathomable how somebody can make turnovers as bad as that. Like that left-handed chuck for a pick six to the Titans in a game that he actually played great for the majority of the game. And that play was like the deciding factor for essentially the division. Like that's a great example. But if you look at what he did this year, dude threw for over 3,500 yards, threw for right around 30 touchdowns. I think it was 28, 29 touchdowns. and he threw, I think, 6 or 7 interceptions. So in reality, turnovers wise, he did not have a whole lot of them. Like of course, there were some throws that probably could have been picked off, but every quarterback has those. I think overarchingly, he definitely played a lot better this season than he did with the Eagles a year ago. And I don't want Garoppolo. I don't want what we'd have to pay for Carr. And like, why would the Raiders trade Carr anyway? They just made the playoffs with him. I don't want Mariota over Wentz. I'd much rather have Wentz than Mariota because Wentz's ceiling has been way higher than Mariota's has been. And as Dolan said, Wentz, as much of a struggle as he is sometimes, he's still got one of the most talented arms in the NFL. Like if you talk about that dude can, like sometimes I'll make a throw and I'll be like I could name maybe 3 quarterbacks in the NFL that could make that throw that he made. But then the next play he'll do something super stupid that like, nobody else would. So I get the dichotomy. I just want to bring it up because in discussing that we're also talking about all the other quarterbacks without even intending to. So we can move on from that. But
quickly before we should jump to the Eagles side because that's kind of the other end of that. Because this trade is going to look like an absolute fleecing when the Colts cut Wentz. Because it looks like you are cutting Wentz. So Cy, quick answer. Assuming that is true and you do move on from him, whether you like it or not, how do you go about addressing the QB? Are you trying to draft one? Are you picking up one of these free agents? Assuming you can't get the huge names. Are you trading for a mid-level guy? What's your
if we can't get one of the big guys, my ideal situation is we end up cutting him. Okay, we save the cap space. We're gonna have a ton of money in cap space. My ideal situation is we just get a holdover guy until we are able to address one in the draft. And when I say holdover guy, I'm talking like I want Ryan Fitzpatrick. Like
Gardner Minshew.
What's up?
Want to run it back? Gardner Minshew, another trade with the Eagles?
I don't know about Minshew, but I'll take Fitzmagic. If the dude can stay healthy, I think he can manage enough for us to get by. But I don't want to drop Wentz and then go trade a second or third round pick for another guy. Like I don't want to take on Garoppolo's contract because he might be a decent game manager, but
he's only got 1 year left. I think
it's better, and
so
it's better than Wentz's. I agree with the draft capital, but his contract's better than Wentz's.
No,
yeah,
I know,
I think if you're,
I'm not giving up a pick for 1 year and $20 million of Garoppolo, right? Like I'd rather have one of the free agent guys and just try to hold over until we get a quarterback. But the problem you're playing with that game is you can do that, but there's no guarantee you're going to get somebody out of it. First of all, this draft is terrible for quarterbacks. Let's just talk about that. Like we can discuss that as a topic point. Any team that requires a quarterback, you're in a terrible spot this year if you have a top 5 to 10 pick, unless you trade down or you just really give up for a guy. Like I can't name one guy that comes out this year that looks like a legitimate stud in the NFL. And after last year's draft where there was like 5 guys that won in the first round, like you can't predict the quarterback position. That's one thing. Secondly, you don't know that even if you do get a good, supposedly good draft quarterback a year later, is he going to be better than Wentz? Or is he going to be better than what some of these other guys, like other teams are willing to give up at the quarterback position with the hopes of finding that guy? Probably not. Like if we're being real, probably not. Because even Wentz, as much as he struggled in some seasons, his ceiling has been way higher than some of the guys that have gone in the first round over the last 5 to 7 years. So I think sometimes when we look at the quarterback situation, I agree with Evan when you say obviously having a great quarterback changes the game. But I also think sometimes people tend to overestimate how often a truly great quarterback comes around or how often a legitimate franchise quarterback that you can build around comes around. And when you look at it that way, I would rather work with what we have than try to hope for something better and screw up the potential to win now with the roster that we have. Like that's the way I look at it. And that's not just for the Colts. That's my philosophy for the league overall. Like if you invest too heavily in trying to get that guy, you might be passing up on your window to win now. And teams have won with game managers, or they have won with, not top 10 quarterbacks before.
Yeah, and I think part of it is you really got to go for a stud if you're making a move in Indy, because no matter what, you're going to have to go through the AFC, which is just loaded with quarterback talent right now. So if you're not getting a clear, definitive upgrade from Wentz, I think you got to just run it back, because you're going to have to go through Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow. It's some combination of those guys in the playoffs, and you might be able to get 1 or 2 of them, but every once in a while, you're just going to need to light up the scoreboard. And so, like, if you're not getting a guy that's going to do that week in and week out, I think you just got to keep rolling dice with the hand you're dealt.
Nope, you're right. And I mean, like I've said though, they might just do it for the 15 million and just be like, we'll figure something out until we get the right guy in the books. But I will say, if we got Wilson or Rodgers, I'm betting on my Colts like all the way. Because if we got like Wilson or Rodgers, we just go sign some receiver across from Pittman, and we'd be good. We'd be good to roll. So
Devontae Adams, bro, bring them both.
I wish, bro. We'll see. Okay,
They're playing together. They're playing together next year. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a Green Bay, but well, they'll find a way.
Sounds like Adams is probably going to get tagged, but
yeah,
we'll see.
Rodgers will go back.
They did. There was some report that came out. I don't know if anything's come out since that said that there is a potential for the Packers to allow him to hit free agency. I'm assuming that would be if Aaron Rodgers doesn't stay with the Packers, because at that point it might benefit them long term to not, have to negotiate that contract with Adams and give him that Michael Thomas kind of number, right? Because they might have to go for a complete rebuild at that point and start over. And if that's the case, they might be better off letting Devontae go get paid $20 million a year somewhere else, which is what he's going to get, because Thomas got what?
Yeah, he's going to get a lot.
18 or 19. He's going to get like over 20.
He might get like 25. Yeah.
Yeah. And they probably don't want to pay him that if they're not going to win anytime soon. Besides,
would be nice.
The Packers spend money.
Would be nice to give Jordan Love that option in year one, though. Just say like, hey, like we got a solid team around you. This is year one. We're going to tag Adams, which I wouldn't be surprised, especially if Rodgers is gone, if he's like, no, I'm not playing on the franchise tag. But letting your young quarterback who's coming into like a team with high expectations have arguably the best receiver in the game to throw to wouldn't be the worst way to help him adjust on that learning curve. But
what do you guys think the Packers' ceiling is if Rodgers leaves and they keep Adams?
Playoff team?
I mean, I think their division's still not fantastic. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if they can run back, win the NFC North. I know a lot of change going on with new coaching staffs in both Minnesota and Chicago, but I think they're still, aside from the quarterback, probably the most talented roster in that division, right?
They have a lot of other free agents they need to bring back, though. So they have a ton of work to do this offseason, not just with QB wide receivers. So there's a lot up in the air with them. But I mean, I think they can make the playoffs, but need to see a lot more from Jordan Love. He did not look good in the one game he played this year.
I mean, granted, it's one game, so maybe we cut him a little slack and we got to give him a season. But yeah, and then what were you said you saw something about how you don't expect Rodgers to get traded?
Yeah, I mean, just all the buzz right now. Like, well, it's more just common sense. Like, his best chance to win is in Green Bay. Like, the rhetoric, I feel like, has been a little more favorable to him staying, but you never know with him. But I don't know. And plus, the haul to get, like, the Packers have to be incentivized to do it. They're not just going to trade him for less than he's worth. So that's going to be. I mean, there are teams that would do it, like your Colts up there or Washington as well, but they're also, in our case, not going to trade him within the conference. So then your options are limited that way to, Colts, Steelers, those types of squads. So I don't know. I don't see any of the big names really moving at this point, just given some of the rhetoric over the last little bit. But I don't know if you guys disagree, but we'll see.
Well, let me put you guys. Sorry, go ahead, Dolan.
No, I was just going to say, I think the one big name that will probably get moved, if you count this, because it's obviously a bizarre situation, would probably be Watson. I think we're getting to the point where it's like, okay, Houston's probably ready to rip this Band-Aid off, and it sounds like there are some pretty serious offers on the table. So I'd be shocked if he's not elsewhere. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be playing football this year, but I think some team's ready to take a chance on him, and the Texans are ready to move on. So that would be the one. But yeah, that's going to be fascinating for a number of reasons to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, I guess it could be sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I guess that's the question. Like, how is that even gonna work? Like, the kinds of stipulations you're gonna need in that trade for, obviously no team's gonna pull the trigger on it with the, without some kind of insurance on the legality issues clearing in their favor so he can play. So that's a messy situation. But there are offers, like Golden said. So we'll have to see.
I also wouldn't rule out the potential of quarterbacks being traded amongst their conference. I mean, obviously, I don't expect them to be traded in their division, but look at the Lions.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be a Colt.
No, I'm not talking about Wilson. I'm certainly not talking about Watson. I was talking about when Evan said earlier, Rodgers being traded. He doesn't expect him to get traded within a division, but if the team makes the best offer and it's not within their division, I could see him doing it, because the Rams and the Lions just pulled off the the Stafford trade. I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibilities unless the Packers think, oh, we're going to go win the Super Bowl this year after we trade Rodgers, which I mean, come on. Like, and also I think they'd be more willing to give him to a team like the Commanders, for example, rather than give him to a team that's already like a playoff team that just needed the quarterback. You know what I mean? Like that's probably a more, that's probably a proposition that they're less willing to do. So I wouldn't rule out, like, I feel like you guys would make some crazy offer and they would certainly consider it.
I think they already said they're not going to trade it within the conference. Maybe not definitively, but they've said that their strong preference is to not. Plus, I think they said he's not going to Washington. Like he doesn't want to or something like that. So I'm pretty sure that one's dead on our side. So
that's fair.
We've given up. As with Russ today saying he's staying on the West Coast, although that was a little less clear. But
I'm sorry, Russell Wilson, if you want out, you can't be like, I'm only willing to stay. Like that gives people two teams, bro. Like you're one of the West Coast teams.
And which of those need quarterbacks? Like
yeah, clearly the Rams don't, and clearly the Chargers don't. So like,
and he's not going to the Niners.
The Seahawks or be more open-minded. That's ridiculous.
We'll see. Yeah. Watson could shake it up. I guess Dolan, you wrote an article on this, so maybe a quick summary, and you can just plug your article. But I guess the Eagles are the team that are strapped with picks, have more draft capital to trade than anyone else on the market, and they have a young quarterback that could be interesting to a lot of teams. So do you think they take a big swing? You know, what would be your kind of approach to the offseason for them, coming off a playoff year and a pretty good core? Overall.
Yeah. Thanks for the plug. Definitely was fun writing that one, and the words kind of flew a little easy, just because I'm constantly thinking about the birds. But I'm definitely on the team with let's ride it out with Hurts. Like you got a couple draft picks. That's a pretty defensive heavy draft, and the defense was definitely the weak part of our roster last year. We just got torched by any quarterback worth his salt, and our record and all the statistics show that. And kind of like what we were going back to earlier, if you want to have success actually in the postseason, you need to find a way to win against good quarterbacks, and especially if, like, I believe Jalen Hurts can win some playoff games. I think he's a good enough quarterback to do that. But I don't think he's going to be the guy who's, carrying a roster. He's not going to be like Deshaun Watson on his later years in the Texans, at least not right now. But I think there was a lot of promise with the growth we saw from Hurts in year 1 to Hurts in year 2 that I'm very excited to see what year 2 to year 3 brings. If they say, hey, we're going to get Russell Wilson or something like that, fine. I'm not going to be upset about it, but I do think that they're in a great position to say, hey, like, let's run this back with a few more assets on the books. Like Wentz's contract is no more like holding them back, so they have a little more money to spend. Address the defense, probably get one more playmaker. Again, I did a more in-depth breakdown of kind of some guys that I think would be ideal targets, but I also wouldn't be surprised if, given those 3 first-round picks, they say, hey, we're going to punt, trade one of these for a 2023 pick and maybe like a second or third rounder or something, depending on who wants to jump up. So that way they say, hey, maybe we don't have 3 first-round picks next year, but if Hurts doesn't take a step up, we'll have at least 2 first-round picks to kind of have this conversation again next year. But I think the arrow is definitely pointing up in Philly right now. And I kind of think it's, hey, let's see where this can go before, trying to shake things up too much. And it sounds like the locker room, the coaching staff, they all absolutely love him. It's just a question of kind of what management thinks. But they've definitely pulled a surprise or two before, so I won't see. I'll be interested in hearing what you guys think, especially you, Evan, being a division rival there.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, like really with like I said, how much draft capital you guys have, you have, several different avenues, all of which would be great. But again, given I think, the big names aren't all that available, so you'd have to give up such a haul to get them. I don't think you guys are quite out of place maybe to do that. I mean, certainly if you got a Wilson or a Rodgers, you guys would be, fringe Super Bowl contenders maybe, just given what those guys bring coming in. But, I think it's smarter to just load up on those picks, build out the rest of the roster. Hurts has played really well, keep riding with him and keep the locker room intact and go from there. See if you can win the division this year and keep building.
What I am interested in though is like, if they do trade him, like what do other teams view Jalen Hurts as? like he has to be an asset because he's making a very small contract for at least the next couple of years because he was a second round pick. So like if a team like, I don't know, let's use Seattle as the example because they seem to be like, especially if they move on, like in a very much rebuilding phase. Green Bay could make the argument like, we think we can win with Love. We have a really good roster in house. But like, what does Seattle think of Jalen Hurts? Like, do they view him as a guy who like can be their quarterback for at least the next, 2 to 3 years, if not longer? And if that's the case, do you maybe get to take on or have to sell away less draft picks than like a team like Washington, for example, where it's like we all know Taylor Heineke's not moving the needle in any trade talks or anything like that. But Hurts, I think, is a big question mark, and I think it would definitely vary from team to team. Where some GMs are like, "Nah, we don't want anything to do with that. He's not a great thrower," whereas others are like, "This dude can kind of ball. He's got a unique style. He's growing. He's a good leader." And maybe there would be some value there. So I don't know. I think that's also a very interesting wrinkle in all of this too.
I think him in Seattle would be great. Sorry to cut you off again there, side, but I think him in Seattle would be great. He's almost like a mini Russell Wilson there. But go ahead, Sam.
Well, the other thought is that here's where I disagree a little bit. I think the way the Eagles made the playoffs last year obviously was they changed their game plan. Sirianni said we're going to start running the football more and we're going to play more of like a ground game, like control the game and control the clock and make the defense stop win. I don't think the Eagles, if they traded for Wilson right now, maybe Rodgers I disagree with a little bit more, but that's also because I just view Rodgers as somebody that can like just really completely take over for in a way that I don't think a lot of other guys can. But at the same time, I just don't see the Eagles and Green Bay pulling that trade off anyway. And I don't think Hurts is as much of an asset to the Packers because they probably want to give Love a chance and probably don't view Hurts at a level like significantly higher than Love in the sense of them literally using a first round pick on Jordan Love when they had Aaron Rodgers. So they probably want
to. And Jalen Hurts was on the board. It was that same draft class, right?
Yeah, good call. So when you look at it that way, I feel like if you traded for Wilson, I don't think the Eagles win the Super Bowl next year, and I don't think they would. Maybe they could get to the NFC Championship because of how good Wilson is, but given what you'd have to give up to get him, you'd give up so many of your draft picks, and then you probably give up Hurts. You get Wilson, you take on a massive contract, but then there's a lot of needs to be addressed, right? Mm-hmm. Like and there's a lot of needs to be addressed for you to be able to compete within the NFC that has a lot of great rosters, and then also to win against the AFC team, you'll probably play a team that has a more complete roster. So that's where I think the situation differs a little bit with like, for example, the Colts and the Eagles, because the Eagles just got Sirianni, and I would argue they went above what people expected of them this year to make the playoffs, and took a different approach than I think people anticipated for them to get there. So I think for them, if I was the GM, I think the smartest thing would be, hey, let's use these picks to build our roster. Hurts just made the playoffs. Give this guy more of a chance to develop. This is his first season playing a full year, and he made the playoffs. Like, I just think it's absurd to think that you have the ability to like really invest 3 first-round picks of draft capital into addressing your roster, running it back with Hurts. And if for some reason it doesn't work out with Hurts, then you just don't pay him a big contract and you have the money to sign somebody else that you could sign to a big contract, when the time comes around, or you invest in something else. I just don't think trading for somebody else right now would be the solution to you guys winning a Super Bowl in the next couple of years. I think you're better off trying to win a Super Bowl in the next couple of years by not giving up your draft picks and making the right picks, like working on your lines, like replacing some of these guys that are getting older and adding some more playmakers to that roster. Because like they need more receivers that are playmakers. Like Smith looks good, but he needs somebody across from him to help him out a little bit. And then they probably need a little bit more in that secondary to really, Darius Slay came around, but he probably needs a little more support. So I just think overarching, like I'd use the picks. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I honestly think half the reason these narratives are going around is, one, the Eagles are always a franchise that's willing to wheel and deal, and they're always looking for quarterbacks, like, the whole QB factory phrase that got thrown out a couple of years ago, whenever that was. But I completely agree. I think what gets lost in this a lot is like people are asking, can Hurts himself grow a little bit? But you also have to look, like, their roster is pretty young overall. And Sirianni was not just the Eagles' first head coach, but he's very young himself, first year as a head coach. So I think if you expect growth out of Hurts, Sirianni, Devontae Smith, and then maybe some help around the edges on offense. I still think the defense is the bigger concern. But if those three in particular can continue to progress, I think the offense can take a really big step forward without adding a ton of pieces. I agree with you. They definitely need a second receiver. They can't keep trotting out Jalen Reagor and Quez Watkins. Obviously I think Dallas Goedert's a beast at tight end helps make that need a little lower, but I think they need someone to come in and just be a reliable third option in the passing game in a run heavy offense, which I don't think you need to do a ton to address that need. But I agree. Keep plugging ahead, let the young guys get better and grow. And if as soon as they stop growing, then you adjust your course. But I think for now, things are going in the right direction.
Agreed.
Also not sold that Wilson is the guy you give up 3 picks for and take on a $40 million contract for anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's older, he's less dynamic, coming off an injury last year, so we'll see what he does this year. But like, he didn't play that well last year, even when he was healthy. And I mean,
he started heating up towards the end.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those deals where he probably, because it was a finger on his throwing hand. I could definitely see that messing with you for a little bit. And Seahawks roster wasn't fantastic overall. So I still think Russ has a couple years of elite football in him. Maybe he's not a top, 3 guy like we were having the conversation about like 2-3 years ago or whatever when he was in the MVP race. But I still think he's very much a Super Bowl quarterback. It's just a question of, is that the right move? And I still lean no, but be like the same thing. When the Sixers were talking about trading for James Harden, I was like, oh, I don't know, probably, yeah. And then immediately I was like, oh, well, watching this guy play in a Sixers uniform, let's get excited about that. And I would do the exact same thing and talk myself into Russell Wilson immediately if that happened. But I'm Team Jalen Hurts.
We're also I think we're overlooking. Russ played really well before he got hurt. Maybe he had one bad game, but overarchingly, he didn't look much different than he did the year before. I think he really only looked older, so to speak, after he got hurt. And that's also because they seemed to rush him back a little bit. I don't know why they did, because I don't think they were ever going to win the Super Bowl. So in my opinion, they should have just given him more time to recover. But Russ, I
heard
think,
it came from him, but yeah, I agree.
Probably. He's a competitor. He doesn't get too excited about sitting on the sideline. So I get that. But I think Russ will be perfectly fine. Granted, again, it depends on the roster. Like, if the Colts are trading for him, yes, do it, because you probably win a Super Bowl with Russell Wilson. If the Eagles are trading for him, I'd probably hesitate a little bit more, and I would do it for like Rodgers, but I don't think I would do it for Wilson just because of the way that team has been winning, right? Like Russ isn't the guy I want to bring in now and just run the football all the time with. Like, I want him to air the ball out deep at this stage of his career. And Rodgers, I think, can air the ball out regardless of who the people around him are. So that's kind of my perspective on that. Russell, you trade for him if you're a team that you know you have a great roster, and if you add Russ, you know that it's going to give you that leg up to just go right there. And like that's just not how I see the Eagles. Like, I think the Eagles have the ability to address a lot. So I think those picks are more valuable than Russell would be in this instance, is the way I look at it. But
like Stafford last year. Like, exactly. The Rams, they knew they had the team around him, and they knew Stafford well elevated. But you got to be in a similar position to do Russ. I agree with that.
And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, watching whichever team thinks they're going to be the Rams this year is going to be pretty interesting, because I think what gets lost in the shuffle a lot is it's not just that the Rams had a talented roster, which they obviously did. They had some of the best players at their respective positions in the league, but like Sean McVay is very clearly one of the best coaches in the league as well. And so, like, I think you need to have all of those boxes checked if you're ready to go in on a quarterback, unless, it is something crazy where it's like, Kyler or Lamar, a guy who's like under 30 years old and like can be your franchise for like years to come. But if you're buying a guy with the hopes of like we're going to win this thing in the next 2 to 3 years, like, you got to be pretty confident. And I'll be interested in seeing which teams, feel like they're there. And it sounds like Washington might be one of those teams, which I do think they have a pretty talented roster. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see which of those teams are like, all right, it's our turn now. We saw the Rams do it. This is possible. We're going to try and follow suit. And it's very likely that some of those teams fall on their faces, but we'll see.
Well, we're about to go over the – oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say we're about to go into the NBA, but I was going to ask you guys who you think those teams are. Like, if you had a team or two from each conference, like, who do you think those teams are? Because, like, obviously I'm biased. I think my Colts would be one of them, but I think they've just proven over the years that they've been a consistent team that's either been in the playoffs or just missed the playoffs. And their biggest issue has been quarterbacks since Andrew Luck retired. So that the Colts I see as one, but another one I would see personally would be like, for example, the 49ers. Now, granted, I think their plan is to roll with Lance long term, but if they're willing to be like, hey, we'll trade Lance and we'll trade a pick and we'll go get a quarterback right now, I could see the 49ers going right to the Super Bowl next year if they could get a really good quarterback, because, you know, the emergence of Debo, no matter who they have a running back, Shanahan's a great coach. It's the statements that you made, Dolan, because Frank Reich and Kyle Shanahan, for example, have both proven that they're great coaches. Maybe not, like, it's probably comparable to what McVay did before the fact in some senses. And I think those are the kinds of teams that you want to invest that capital in, where also cap space is a big thing. Like, don't just do it unless you have the ability to take these contracts on and still add, which I think both of these teams are in a position to do so, given some of the roster cuts / additions that they've had. So I'm struggling to think of a couple more. The Commanders could be, but it would be a big jump from how they finished last year versus a year before to what they would do next year. I guess it really depends on the health of their players and guys like Chase Young coming back, but it would probably be very exciting for somebody like a Terry McLaurin to have somebody to actually throw him the football. So that's an option.
One big team that I hear a lot, and part of this is because I live in Denver, and so, you know, you just hear the buzz around here more often, is definitely the Broncos. I think they'd be a really, really good fit for Rodgers. Their defense is loaded with talent. I think a good portion of that was the fact that, you know, Fangio was their head coach last year, and he's one of the best defensive minds in the league. So I think you can reasonably expect the defense to take a little step back, but they still have the talent there. They just brought in, what's his name, Nathaniel Hackett. So obviously he has a relationship with Rodgers. I wouldn't say they have a superstar core group of receivers, but I think between, you know, Judy, Sutton, Tim Patrick to an extent, Noah Fant, like, there are some weapons in the passing game. They have a respectable offensive line. And then Javonte Williams looks like he's an absolute beast. And it sounds like they're trying to bring back Melvin Gordon as well. So I think there will be plenty to work with on offense. And if they have one of the league's better defenses as well, I think that's a team that can make the step forward. But again, going back to what we were saying, the coaching staff's unproven. So, like, are you going to take that risk? I think you should, given all the, you know, QB carousels the Broncos have dealt with last year, and considering I do think they have a young, talented roster. But that's the one that immediately jumps to mind for me. And again, there's a little bias because, you know, I live here, but that's I think that would be a super, super interesting fit, especially, I mean, you throw Rodgers in a division where he gets to play Mahomes and Herbert twice a year. I think that would just be awesome for the sake of the NFL in general too.
The other teams I'll mention, I forgot about the Broncos. I don't know how, because obviously that Rodgers to Denver fit is perfect if they do trade him. I think there's teams that probably think that they're a quarterback away, but probably aren't. I think Pittsburgh thinks that they could get a veteran quarterback and make some noise. Cleveland's interesting. You haven't heard much buzz on them, but yeah, that's an interesting one. Carolina's another one, especially for like Deshaun. There's been buzz on that in the past. I think those are the other ones you guys didn't mention, but I don't necessarily think they're like a guy and go to the Super Bowl teams, but I think they are, maybe.
I think Carolina is the prime example of we think we are, but we're not. So it would be fun to see a stud quarterback throwing the ball to DJ Moore and getting McCaffrey involved. But yeah, I think their hot start early in the season makes them think they're kind of better than they are. And so I could see them being a team that's kind of desperate and falls flat on their face after, you know, getting rid of Joe Brady and bringing in freaking Bob McAdoo. Like, it sounds like the Panthers are ready to spiral, and they might be in desperation mode. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But it sounds like they're ready to be very, very aggressive in this market as well.
Well, I actually think the Panthers, the thing with them is they have a lot of talent on paper. So I do think that they're a team that could down the road be good. But one thing they have to do is fix their injuries. And two, they still got to build in the trenches more, because, you know, they got to shore up that offensive line a little bit more, make sure their guys aren't getting hurt. And then you bring a quarterback in, and I think they got a ton of potential. Like you said, I think DJ Moore is still very underrated, because when he's got a guy that can throw him the football, he's one of the best,
he's a beast,
legitimate receptions guy. And then they have some really solid guys like Brian Burns and company of leading the way on defense. So they do have the talent. But I actually disagree with you, Ab. I think Pittsburgh, if they could get a quarterback and one decent offensive lineman, I legitimately think they could make noise, because their offense is absolutely loaded. poor Najee Harris, and as his rookie, with no support whatsoever from that offensive line, and with Big Ben extremely immobile, was still able to be successful. So I can only imagine how much running lanes would open up for him if they had a somewhat mobile quarterback. And then their defense is still good. Like, their defense has always been good, and it'll continue to be good. And we talk about coaches. There are a few coaches I trust as much as I trust Mike Tomlin to put together a winning team, even when everything else makes you feel like they shouldn't be a winning team. He has done that year in and year out. And I legitimately think their biggest problem has been Ben Roethlisberger outside of their offensive line. So I actually think the Steelers, if they get a good quarterback, could jump right back into it in the AFC. I have full confidence in that. However, that good quarterback would have to be great. I'm not saying like, go get Kirk Cousins and he's going to solve your problems. I'm saying if they can get Aaron Rodgers, yeah, you go for it, because Rodgers, Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, and Chase Claypool is your offense. With Freiermuth, that like tight end that came out of nowhere, that offense would be like unreal. Like, that would be so fun to watch. That's my perspective.
I think they could even get away with a Derek Carr. I mean, they were a playoff team this
Derek
year.
Carr is a beast.
The corpse of Ben Roethlisberger. He's very good. I agree. Beast is a strong word, but he's not
he's barely off
obviously
Russell Wilson for me. If even off Russell Wilson.
Whoa, chill.
Derek Carr was a stud last year, and he's on that leadership tier with Russell. He is that good.
He's an incredible leader, and he had a terrific season, especially given how much his odds are stacked against him. But his ceiling has went nowhere near Russell Wilson. So Russell's best season, he was like one the person away from being an MVP. Derek Carr was nowhere near that.
Russ isn't that guy
Derek
anymore.
Carr was getting a lot of MVP buzz in probably his like third or so year. I will say that, but I'm with you that I think there's a tier break there.
And I agree, Russ probably isn't washed, but he's 100% not the guy he used to be, because he doesn't run anymore. He's nowhere near as dynamic. He's stopped running because, he's older and he's a lot less dynamic. His capability is not quite as there. So
I think it's just more like him just kind of feeling like, okay, I have these like two big time receivers, so let me chuck the ball down the field. But I think if he was motivated and was on a team that he felt like he could win with, Russ would step right back into it. Also, I think we're also probably overhyping Carr, because his numbers were good, but they weren't like blow you out of the water good. And they made the playoffs, which is great. But what do you expect them to do next year? I don't see the Raiders as a playoff team next year. I think they kind of defied the odds this year. And I think Carr has been like, for most seasons, he's been a little bit above average or mediocre. Last season was his 1 year where you could point to and be like, okay, look, he has the potential to be like a noticeable above average quarterback. So I'm not one to come make that proclamation immediately. Like, his ceiling
that might be enough in Pittsburgh, though. Don't you?
I don't think so, because of that offensive line. Like, I think you need someone who can like blow like can just blow the offense open. I don't think Carr's that guy. I think Carr would be amazing for any team that needs game management. But at the same time, I don't even know why we're talking about Carr, because the Raiders are never going to trade him now. Like, after last season, that dude is their franchise quarterback. He could have 3 terrible seasons, and then maybe they consider losing him. But that one season, that's the thing with quarterbacks. If they have 1 year where they get their team to the playoffs against all odds, all of a sudden they're their franchise quarterback through thick and thin. And Carr could be terrible for 3 years, and that guy would still be a Raider. Like, that's how the NFL works with quarterbacks. I mean, like, same thing that happened with Wentz. He had one great season that made him look like an MVP, and then the Eagles gave him 3 years and a massive contract to give him an opportunity to come back, even though he was nowhere near that form, and then they finally traded him, right? So I don't see a quarterback getting traded right after they made the playoffs.
I agree. He's a name that gets thrown out there a lot, but I do think I think the Steelers would be a Super Bowl caliber team if they had him, but I agree. I think this is more hypothetical than anything else. I think they're just I love their roster. I love Mike Tomlin. I think they're just such an awesome organization from a football perspective that, like, I want to see some of those guys on their team. Like you were saying, Najee, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson. I think it'd just be fun to see them have a good quarterback.
You think that's their team? If I put them next to the Chiefs or the Bengals or the Bills, you really think with Carr they would be able to? I don't know, man. I don't know if I see them being.
I think they'd have a fighting chance.
Maybe the Bengals, but I think the Bills and Chiefs still have a leg up there.
I think they'd have a fighting chance. I don't think they would be like a favorite in any of those games, but I think it comes back to, like, what you were saying about Mike Tomlin. Like
Good point.
he knows how to win
Good
football
point.
games, and like at a certain point, like he'll win some games he shouldn't. Like Steelers should not have been a playoff team this year, but somehow they squeaked in. Granted, it's the expanded 7 seed or whatever, and they got trounced in round 1. But I think if they get the quarterback, because they had a big time negative at the quarterback position this year. If you get average or slightly above average, I think that team could do some damage. But it'll be interesting to see what they actually do. I mean, if they're rolling out Mason Rudolph again next year, then I think we are counting them out. But
yeah, I'm gonna feel real bad for Najee Harris. And you know what? One last thing I'll say about that is, I do actually like the Derek Carr point, because I feel like his absolute ceiling, like if he ever gets there with consistency, is somebody like a Ben Roethlisberger. Like he's never gonna be the best quarterback in the league, but he could definitely be a guy that puts up like consistent performances in situations where we need him. And as long as he has a good roster around him, they can get there. Because even when the Steelers won Super Bowls with Ben Roethlisberger, he was never the best quarterback in the league. He was always a guy that could make the big throws, but they always had like that loaded, running back, your Bus Bettis, your amazing defense, your receivers supplanting him. So in that way, I actually really see him being somebody that could work well with Tomlin. So that's a very fair point, Dylan. I hadn't considered that. This would be really interesting, though. I think there are a lot of teams with a lot of talent that could take that quarterback and take a huge step up. But I think there's only a few where I could see them being like, okay, if you get this guy, if the Niners got Aaron Rodgers, which isn't going to happen, if the Colts got Aaron Rodgers, which isn't going to happen, those teams would immediately be like top 5 teams in the NFL for me without even blinking. And then there's a couple other teams where it's just kind of like you have to make that distinction. So it just depends. But I'm excited, man. This offseason is gonna be good. There's a lot of rumors out there. And speaking of exciting, I think it's time we give Dolan his limelight, because he hasn't got to talk a lot of NBA with us, and you can finally talk about James Harden and Joel Embiid and the beauty that is the Sixers. Because to be honest, I never wanted Harden as a part of the Nets, not because I don't like Harden. I think Harden is actually often underrated for what he did with Houston and his capabilities as an individual, but simply because I didn't want Kyrie, Durant, and Harden's legacy to be diluted if they ever did win a ring, because I don't think it would have meant much. But now it seems like this was a win-win for both teams, and I'm really excited to watch to watch both teams with Harden playing with Embiid. So I got to get your opinion on that, because it's been a highlight reel already.
Yeah, I was definitely a little concerned. I mean, you never really love the idea, regardless of how talented someone is, of bringing in a guy who kind of gave up on his last 2 teams. So I was a little nervous. And then Friday night came around, and him and Embiid together are like, I honestly already think it's 2 games. This is probably premature, but they might already be the best duo in the NBA. If you step back and think about it, I think definitely offensively they are. And I think this move just was an absolute perfect roster fit. And I think there's a very, very good chance from here on out, the Sixers actually have the best offense in the entire NBA. I think they have as good a shot at winning the Eastern Conference as anybody. And I'm just stoked. I mean, you see in the game Friday and in the game Sunday against the Knicks, you can't double team Joel Embiid anymore, who might be the best player in basketball. And that's a terrifying thought. I know a lot of people are kind of hating on all the fouls that are being drawn, which, not necessarily the most entertaining basketball. It's pleasant for me as a Sixers fan. But at the end of the day, it's like, they're not always just foul hunting. Sometimes these 2 dudes are just completely unguardable, and there's no other choice. Yes, you'll see him hit the sweet move every once in a while. But sometimes it's just like Embiid bullies someone to the post, or Harden, gets free and just makes magic happen. And then Tyrese Maxey too, cannot get lost in the shuffle. One of the things that I was really, really worried about was, okay, Harden's going to come in and Maxey's going to become a glorified backup point guard. But those 2 work so well off of each other that it's absolutely incredible. They're both almost playing combo guard roles, and Maxey's just been feasting on the lack of attention that he's been getting. And I know Tobias Harris gets a lot of flack. I think once he acclimates as well, he's not a max player, I agree, but if you're
he's barely a $10 million a year player right now, dude. He can't even hit double figures.
But I think that's fine. And I don't think he's someone who's like going to cause a problem because of that. And I think once he gets mixed into the fold a little bit, I think he's one of the best fourth options in the league. Offensively, he can hold his own on defense. So I'm stoked. I think the Sixers are going to be awesome. And I think just the Eastern Conference playoffs in general are going to be fantastic because they're so deep. I mean, you're looking at the Nets potentially being a play-in team. The Celtics are right there as well. I mean, I don't know if I'm like completely sold on, say, like the Cavs yet, but I think they'll be a fun team to watch in the postseason. I think the Bulls are legit. I love what DeRozan's bringing to that city. I think they are awesome, just a fun, unique style of basketball. So yeah, I'm just stoked. I mean, it's usually right when the Super Bowl ends is when I really get into the NBA, and the fact that it happened at like the exact same time as the Sixers bringing in James Harden, I can't wait to keep watching and keep seeing more because man, those Harden and Embiid together are just like poetic. It's the absolute perfect fit. And I'm interested in hearing what some non-Sixers fans think. Maybe bring me back down to earth a little bit, but man, it's exciting.
I'll let Ev go first because shout out to our boy Smicky, but he's one of Ev's absolute best friends, and Smicky's maybe the biggest Sixers fan I've ever met. And I know quite a few Sixers fans, so I'll let Ev go because I know he probably hears about the Sixers nonstop. So yeah, buddy, I'll go after you.
Speaking of that, I was at that Sixers game with Smicky. I was donning an Embiid jersey up there in the MSG rafters. Go. But I mean, I thought Harden and Embiid, like you pair them together, like, you know, most dynamic combination in the NBA. Obviously, when Harden wants to be somewhere, he's a stud. Like right when he got traded to Brooklyn, he was all excited and wanted to be there. He was playing MVP basketball. So, and then, you know, Maxey is just like, you know, the energy he brings. And, you know, if you listen to some of his interviews and stuff, he's a really impressive young kid. So like, and he's really smart. So the way he's going to be able to adapt his style of play around James is like, you know, I don't worry about that. Like he's going to have to be more of a spot up 3-point shooter, but you know, he's already shown he's going to be able to do that. And Tobias is pathetic. All he really needs to do is to be a spot up 3-point shooter and knock down open threes. And he hasn't even been able to do that lately. He arguably should be coming off the bench. And you got some other nice young players like Danny Green's a nice contributor, Matisse Thybulle, elite defender. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, like when you get Kyrie and KD going, I'm betting by the time the playoffs roll around, Kyrie will be able to play home games. It's not quite there yet. And then Ben Simmons got a sore back. So, you know, obviously
I have a feeling he's going to be healthy as soon as that Sixers game is behind them on the schedule. That'll be convenient.
He's ducking the Sixers, but what if they play him in the playoffs? That's going to be a nightmare for Ben. So it's just going to be interesting.
He would get destroyed in every away game.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine that.
The hack of Ben strategy in Philadelphia would be just
no, uproar. But that's the beauty of it, right? So first and foremost, let me just say this. Amazing trade for the Sixers because if you can get James Harden, you get James Harden. Like there's no question about that. And being able to do it without giving up Thybulle, Maxey, and obviously you're never giving up Embiid, but being able to keep those three and adding James Harden to those three puts you guys, again, like you said, right in contention for the East and right up there. And I do agree with you. I think at least in terms of when you consider health, you guys definitely have the best dynamic duo right now. If you talk about the top two, the other ones out there out in the picture, like Chris Paul and Devin Booker, have been incredible with the Suns. But you can't really like. When I think of dynamic duo, I think the way they play off of each other, and like Harden obviously as the ball dominant guard, and then Embiid being able to be somebody that can play off the ball and shoot, but also get fed in the post and is also extremely athletic and dynamic and get the ball. And on the flip side of that, can just play lockdown defense when he needs to. Puts Harden in that perfect position. And I always said if Harden was willing to be like, hey, I'm willing to do a little more pick and roll and get Embiid the ball in spots, then that's going to be an incredible too. And I think that's what's like, even the first couple of games, their chemistry is off the wire. So those two together just seems like a perfect fit. But here's what I'll say about Harden. No more excuses. Like you've had, and I've been one of those people that's made the excuses for him. Like I've been like, you know, hasn't been in the best situations always. And he's made the most out of some worse situations. But then when the lights are the brightest, he disappears. And this, like, as much as Embiid can carry him, he has no excuses. Like I get at least maybe if they don't win this playoffs, they better get to a conference championship. And if they don't win this playoffs, they better win in the next year or two, or else Harden's legacy is tarnished, because he's had so many opportunities with so many different stars at that point to win a championship, and he didn't. And this is the most balanced the NBA has ever been, right? And that's what's most exciting about this trade for me. Harden leaving the Nets means that if Kyrie and KD are ever completely on the floor together, this is the most balanced the NBA has ever been, because it's a league full of dynamic duos when it comes down to it, in the sense of teams that are going to be successful in the playoffs. So that's super excited about the trade. I think this makes the Sixers obviously better, but I also think in a way this makes the Nets better. And I think we're seeing that already, because even without Simmons having touched the floor, they got Seth Curry and Andre Drummond. It makes them better because Harden clearly didn't want to be there anymore. And they got Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and Ben Simmons. And Kyrie obviously is a question mark with the sense of how the vaccination goes, but it's like Evan said, it's seeming way more likely that he's going to be able to be a full-time player, not just by playoffs, but probably before. I know the first level of COVID restrictions with vaccines is being lifted the first week of March. And even Adam Silver came out the other day and said it's ridiculous that in New York, an away player can come into town and play unvaccinated, and they're okay with that. But a guy that isn't vaccinated and plays in New York isn't allowed to. So, and I think that's kind of catching a little heat. So I think there's a chance that he plays soon. But just to get off the rant, my point is, if Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and then the litany of guys, Patty Mills, just all these other, they have such good role players, Bruce Brown, they can get guys like that coming off the bench. That Nets team is so incredibly deep. And then you have two guys in Kyrie and KD who are arguably the most clutch players in the NBA at their respective positions in the playoffs when the lights are brightest, who can score whenever they want to score. They have defensive stoppers all over the place. With Ben Simmons, you can put on anybody. You can put him on James Harden. You can put him on whoever the best player is on the other team at the perimeter. You put him on him and just say, go play defense and bring the ball up. That's all you have to do. We're going to take the pressure off you. You don't ever have to hit a big shot. You don't ever have to make the big play. On offense, just get the right guy the ball and go play defense. Ben Simmons, I think there could not be a better fit for his role. So I think if the Nets get KD and Kyrie back and Ben comes back around, even if they don't have Simmons, I think with KD and Kyrie, that team could go win a championship. But if they get Ben Simmons, I'm not betting against the Nets, dude. And that's all bias aside. It's not just because I'm a Kyrie fan. It's because I can't find a single weakness on that team if that ends up being the case. That team would be foolproof in the sense of dynamics, in the sense of defense, offense, whatever you want to talk about. They'll have every box checked. So it's just so exciting for the East because, you got the Bucks still, who Giannis is probably still the best player in the league, right next to Embiid. And then the other thing I think to myself is the Nets just went and beat that Bucks team on the road with Kyrie, Seth, and Draymond. No Simmons, no Kevin Durant. That just already shows the level up. So that Eastern Conference is just becoming menacing. I'll throw it back to you guys as to what you think the Nets ceiling is or who you would pick. But if they're all healthy, I'm still picking the Nets. And again, that's what me completely eliminating bias. I think this just puts them in such a good position.
But I agree from a bias aside, strictly basketball fit. I think it's fantastic. I could definitely see him thriving there, not needing to take a ton of shots. I don't necessarily agree that the Nets don't have a weakness. I think if you're rolling out Andre Drummond, Ben Simmons, or LaMarcus Aldridge as your best option for guarding Embiid for 7 games in a playoff series, I think that's problematic. But I think the shot making that they have, outside of Simmons, it makes them absolutely terrifying. Exactly what you were saying about KD and Kyrie. I think in terms of, as a Sixers fan, the teams that I'm most scared of in the East, I think they are neck and neck with the Bucks. The Bucks are just, more proven. They've shown they can do it. The Nets haven't had the best season, but if they're all healthy and have at least a little bit of time to gel before the postseason starts, I mean, that team is terrifying. They've got, 3 of probably the top 25 best players in the league, one of which is probably top 3 to 5, being Kevin Durant. And I think just there's something to be said in playoff basketball for having guys that can just make shots in a half-court offense. And so I agree. It will be very interesting to see what they do with Simmons and like, are these, mental health problems that he claims, are they going to surface when he comes back to Philadelphia, or when, the Bucks start fouling him in the postseason? Like, is he going to crater again, or is a change of scenery actually going to do wonders for him? So I think that will be very interesting to see how they use him on offense, and will they be able to get by if they go with the same approach as last year and just say, hey, we're just going to foul you. That's our best chance at slowing down your offense. So I don't know.
Well, that's why he's the perfect fit, because you just sit his ass on the bench. Like, I mean, let's just be real here. With the Sixers, you guys didn't have that option because Embiid was your number one player, and then Simmons was your two. Simmons doesn't even need to be their third best player for them to win a championship. As a matter of fact, the joke was earlier, you were like, yeah, he won't have to shoot as much. If I'm the Nets, I'm saying don't shoot. Like, just don't shoot. Like, the only thing you're allowed to do is make layups or dunk every now and then, but just don't shoot. Like, you have 4 other guys around you that are going to be able to shoot. If Ben Simmons isn't able to, if he's going to get fouled, this is the easy solution. Take him out, put in Patty Mills, and just let Kai, KD, Patty Mills, and whatever other 2 guys you want out there.
Then you have a weakness, though, because you can't defend. But I agree. He doesn't need to be on the floor.
Yeah, I'm saying he doesn't need to be on the floor. You can sub in and out accordingly. And actually, you say that, but that's the other thing. They're young guys, and because of all the roster moves, I'm forgetting names here and there. What's his name? They have one deep. Yeah, Kessler. Kessler
Edwards,
defensive stud, dude. I mean, this guy's a rookie. Is taking on the best players in the NBA, and he's got a little bit of Thibault in him in that way. Maybe not to the same level, but he's got that kind of play for him. They'll just put him in. Like, I'm just saying, they're so deep, it's ridiculous. Like, this trade made them. And again, I think Seth Curry and Drummond were perfect additions for what they needed. They needed another guy that could go out there and shoot, especially with Joe Harris hurt this season, and who could play a little defense on the wing, which Seth Curry brings. And then they needed a guy like Drummond who can. It's okay. It's not.
He's
bad.
a horrible defender.
Go back and watch the Hawks series last year.
He's a sniper, but that guy is an awful defender.
Is he that? Okay, maybe
he's bad. He's a
sniper.
But to your point, though, it was a great acquisition. They needed someone.
Yeah, I still agree with
that.
The way,
but he's not.
He replaces Joe Harris's need, and it's not like Joe Harris was a good defender either. And then on the flip side of that, Drummond, not the best matchup for Embiid, but it gives them a much better matchup for Embiid than what they had before. I'd rather put Drummond on him than I would Blake Griffin or LaMarcus Aldridge, or honestly, they probably would have had to put Kevin Durant on him. There's just
they wouldn't risk Durant getting fouled that many fouls.
True.
But yeah, I agree. He might be, from an actually guarding you standpoint, the best bet. But yeah. But nobody can see Embiid averaging 40 in that series.
Yeah, and the Heat, man, I'll take the Heat. They'll just rock fight you out of the building, and they're at the top of the conference right now, man. So Tyler Hero's on a heater. So we'll see what happens, though. It's, like I said, I mean, and that's East alone, because I think the Suns are my 1A favorite once Chris Paul is back, bar none. So it's gonna be fun, though.
Yeah, the Heat have been like the quietest 1 seed I can remember in recent memory, and it's because they're playing just such sound, fundamental basketball. It almost reminds me of the Spurs teams from the prior decade, where it's just yeah, they have some stars. Jimmy Butler's fantastic. Bam Adebayo is playing out of his mind right now, but they don't have a top 5, probably even top 10. I think you could make an argument for even top 15 guy in the league. But they just have such a cohesive group that they're terrifying. I guess kind of wrap this all up. Evan, are they your pick to make it out of the East, or were you just throwing them in there, you think?
It is hard to pick them over the talent that you have on those other 2 teams. But I think, having not seen the Nets all together, give me the Heat.
It's funny you say that. I think when the lights are brightest, I'm not saying they won't perform, but I am saying that these other teams will have players that perform at a level that the Heat just won't be able to. Even with
they've got winners, though. It was the bubble season. Don't get me wrong, but they made the finals that year, and then Kyle Lowry as well, a new addition from that team.
I don't dispute that, but I'm just saying they never ran into a team like the current Nets or Sixers, and the Bucks now are way more sound than they were a couple years ago in the sense of their growth. I mean, Giannis is a way different player now than he was then. I mean, after getting that championship, and I don't think he's going to have those nerves. But just even outside of that, and this is an if, right? Like first of all, Kyrie has to be able to play all the games, and then Kevin Durant has to come back and stay healthy. Like I think he'll come back, but he just has to stay healthy. But I just don't feasibly understand how in a 7-game series you're going to beat them with the Heat roster, because even though they can show up and play tough defense, nobody is stopping Kevin Durant and nobody's stopping Kyrie Irving when they're hot. And on the flip side of that, nobody on that team is going to be able to score at a level to be able to keep up with those guys. It's just going to be unfair when it comes down to that situation. I think it really, for me personally, and this is no disrespect to the Heat, it's just really stars come to play in the playoffs, and I think you need a guy to be a top 5 player or a top 10 player for you to be able to get to the finals. And that's why I think it's a 3-team race in the East. But I will say one thing, and the 3-team being the Eagles, the Sixers, the Bucks, and the Nets, assuming, that things get healthy for the Nets. But I will say this, that Cavs team is so fun, guys. I mean, that team is so fun. Mobley, Garland, Karis LeVert, Jarrett Allen. We're talking like some of the best young players at their respective positions all on the same team together. I genuinely would not be surprised if LeBron James came back there in a year or two, because if I were him, I'd want to go play with that team. That team is so fun. And do not be surprised when they take one of these teams to like 6 or 7 games, because they're so young and so dynamic and so quick and just such a team right now. They're not going to be an easy win for anybody.
Plus they have the unique style with the Twin Towers, Mobley and Allen, both in the starting lineup. Lauri Markkanen's also like 6'10", playing a small forward in their starting lineup.
I forgot about Markkanen.
Yeah. Kevin Love's actually playing really well this year for some reason. I mean, they're a squad. Obviously, Garland's out right now, but hopefully it's not too long. And then the other update is Jaylen Brown might have suffered a serious ankle injury tonight. That could change the dynamic. It looks like he kind of limped off okay, but that one's kind of up in the air.
Well, the Celtics were never a factor, in my opinion.
They're playing really well, though.
No,
I don't know if you guys have seen this, but like all of the odds machines love the Celtics. Like if you go on 538, like they're the title favorite. Like a lot of other like analytical models have them as like the favorite to win the East, if not like the close. It's insane. Like I read a piece on it this morning. It's on the Ringer if you guys want to check it out. It's actually pretty. I thought it was super interesting because it was kind of talking through like what the model values and why the Celtics kind of fit that. But also just kind of going off from the strictly data intensive side and talking about like their roster in general. So great read for anybody listening to this. Highly recommend checking that out. But it's basically come down to like, because they have like one of the best plus minuses in the league. And I think their defensive rating is like one of the best as well. And so, or I guess point differential, not plus minus, sorry. But yeah, I think they could definitely scare some people. I think they're a matchup for like some of those teams like the Heat, where it's like they kind of lack that superstar. But I think I'm with you there, Sai, as well, that I think to win in the playoffs, you kind of need more often than not the best player on the court on your side. And I think in the East in particular, there are 3 teams with, MVP caliber players leading the way. Wouldn't surprise me if Miami does it. It would more so with Boston. But obviously at the end of the day, I mean, fully willing to admit there is a crap load of bias in this. Give me the Sixers. I think their ceiling is definitely the highest of the bunch.
That's fair.
And they've shown a little bit of it already. Granted, 2-game sample size. But yeah, give me the Sixers in the East for sure.
Shout out Dolan for coming on. Check out his article. We'll link it in the description. I guess next one's maybe a March Madness bracket. I don't know. Sai, what do you think? Is that the next? We'll have to see what Zebo thinks when he gets back on. But yeah, Dolan, any last words? Appreciate you coming on once again.
No, yeah, just again, as always, ton of fun being here, chopping it up. And yeah, excited for, the NFL offseason, the NBA playoffs to keep heating up. And yeah, just it was fun. And looking forward to hopefully coming back again soon and chatting it up with Zach. We missed having you here today, bud. But I hope you're enjoying yourself at the show. So yeah, take it easy, everybody. And thanks again for having me on.
Mondays down south.
That was Mondays down south. Peace. We can't say broken, otherwise we'll get canceled. Well, no, but we post on Spotify, so we're good. Spotify's got our back.
Might give you a bonus.